I always echo when I come on. Let me mute. Okay, back. We're really excited to see you all here. We can't even see you, but I'm excited to know that you're here and to talk about account hierarchies and ways to align your enterprise account data on this very rainy New York Thursday. Today's event is hosted by the team at Modern Sales Pros, which is the world's largest revenue leadership community for those in sales management, sales and rev ops, sales dev, and all the relating supported disciplines. And our mission is to create an environment for our 20,000 and constantly growing members to answer questions they might struggle to answer on their own and see around corners they might not know are even there. We do that through great live sessions like the one you're about to experience today, a robust online forum where all of our members go in and add a lot of content and value and insights. And we have started doing in-person events. Our most recent one was 2 weeks ago. We did a ladies wind down, which was really fun. And next week we have our summit, which I'll talk more about. And we have 2 in-person happy hours, so we hope to see you at one of them, one in San Francisco and then one at New York. So if you want to come hang out with me, I'll be at the New York happy hour. We already know you're going to love this content, but if you love MSP content, you can also check out our 3-day Revenue Excellence Summit happening next week. It's going to be the 12th through the 14th, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. We've got 11 events over those 3 days with amazing content, amazing speakers. You'll hear from folks at Drift, at Lean Data, Pendo, Dialpad, Figma, HAM, the list goes on and on. And Eduardo's going to drop a link so you can get signed up. And don't forget to sign up for that happy hour so we can see you in person as well. A few housekeeping notes for us. We would never let this content just float out into the world, never to be seen again. You will have access to this recording and you will have access to our MSP website page where it will live on forever, and you can share it with your favorite colleagues, your favorite folks, so they can get aligned in their enterprise data as well. We also love our events to be really, really interactive. You'll see that there's a chat feature at the top left-hand side of your screen. You can chat with us. I see Vincent saying, hello, can't wait. I'm going to raise the roof emoji. You can do that if you want to participate as well. We've got some folks in there and we love it to be really, really interactive. You can also use the Q&A feature. If you're feeling a little spicy today, there's a video Q&A feature. You can record a video of yourself answering a question. That's a little out there, but we love to see it if you're going to go into there. So those are main features there. And speaking of interaction, we do have a poll that we'd love for you to interact with. Just start right off the bat with some awesome engagement here. So I'm going to open this up, and the way that you'll answer that is there's a red dot now where it says poll. Just hit that poll button, and then you can start voting for your options. So our question is, what are your top 3 challenges or things that have held you back from aligning enterprise data? And there are tons of options. Oh, I see the numbers coming in already. Wow. So I'll give that a few seconds and then I'll close the poll. All right, I see people going in and going in. I'm actually going to leave it open while we run through our agenda today. So here's what we're going to talk about: the importance of aligning your enterprise customer data, the challenges of aligning or connecting account data, what's standing in the way of all of that alignment, how to get started on alignment, and then you're going to get some cool tips from our speakers on their TOPS results and impact on go-to-market or enterprise selling environment, any measurable data that they might have, and then you're going to get all of their cool takeaways and advice to share as well. So I'm going to go ahead and stop that poll. Close. Dave, would you like me to share that now, or should I wait till a little bit to share the results?
Oh, I think it's fine to share them now.
Cool. Yeah. Let's share it now. Share. Okay. All right. Here's our results. We got dirty data. That's the top, and it looks pretty spread even. Only the budget and the other got the 0%. Dave, any comments on that? You want me to leave this up for a bit?
I think we're going to touch on a lot of that in the
content.
But yeah, it's not super shocking. It looks like 1 manually connecting accounts, number 2, and then silo data, number 3.
Yeah.
Interesting, actually, that no one said budget. Yeah. Okay.
Oh, we've got a lot of wealth happening on the call today, apparently. All right, I'm going to click stop share. We can come to that if we ever need to as well. All right, let's hop into the content. This, if you didn't know, is actually a 4-part Modern Sales Pros Masterclass track. So you're going to learn a lot about master account hierarchies in Salesforce. And today we're going to be talking about aligning your enterprise account data. So this is just the foundation for the next 3 sessions. And we're going to take a deep dive into topics from managing your complex territories to selling smarter into enterprise businesses. We all want to sell smarter, right? So to kick us off, we know all too well that data proliferates very quickly. And in practice, that honestly feels impossible to manage. So today we've got 2 experts. We've got Dave and Scott in the room. Give us a little wave, a little raise the roof to help us simplify this really complex topic, this really complex problem. And we're going to start with aligning your customer data. So I'm really excited to introduce these folks. We've got Dave here, and he is an expert in account hierarchies, all things data, the data king, if you will. He has over 18 years of experience designing software, and today he runs Traction Complete, which helps a lot of organizations like DocuSign, Cisco, Asana solve really complex data issues in Salesforce. So who better to be talking about this? Dave, I'd love to pass to you to speak a little bit more about what you love about Traction Complete, what you do there, a little bit more about your experience.
Sure. Yeah, sounds good. Thanks for having me, Taylor. And thank you to Modern Sales Pros. I've been a member of Modern Sales Pros for, I think, 6 years now. Ooh. And I'm just so impressed with the attitude of the community, sharing content, helping each other thrive personally in their roles, but also as their businesses. It's pretty cool and a huge testament to Pete Kaczynski for creating that. So thanks, guys. And hopefully today we can contribute ourselves a little bit. So what do we do? Traction Complete builds software that helps customers really simplify their data complexity in Salesforce. And I'm guessing that most of the people on this call are all too familiar that Salesforce can get to become a mess. Dirty data, empty records, data that hasn't been linked together, which causes major struggles when you're trying to report and in your already complex sales territories. And so the apps that we build, we try to bring some order to that chaos by manually and automatically linking records together, by helping clean up duplicate records, and by allowing revenue teams to manage their very complex rules.
Amazing. I love bringing order to the chaos. I'm a highly organized person, so that music to my ears. And second, we've got Scott here. Give us a wave, Scott. Oh, wait, Albany? Are you in Albany?
No, I'm in Rochester.
Dang it. I knew it was one of the two, but hello, Scott. Scott is an industry sales ops leader with 19 years of experience and is currently the vice president of sales operations at Windstream Enterprise. And he's gained experience at Earthlink and at Xerox. I love the Xerox experience. And today he's going to talk a little bit more about Windstream and how they completely transform their data infrastructure by aligning account data in Salesforce. So Scott, give us a little bit more of your background. Tell us more about sales ops and why you're really excited to talk about this topic today.
Perfect. Hey, thank you so much, Taylor. Thank you, Dave. Great to be with everybody. For those not familiar with Windstream, Windstream Enterprise is a leading managed services provider, providing a suite of award-winning connectivity, collaboration, and security solutions. We're structured into 2 business units, and I sit in our enterprise organization. As a sales ops leader, I support close to about 400 sellers, made of inside as well as field resources. And we really worry about, compensation, quota, sales coverage, data governance, systems, tools, and sales management process, right? All the things that I'm guessing most of the people listening here today, are worried about. And ultimately, as I go to bed every night and as I flip-flop in bed, right, I'm really worried and focused on trying to get our sellers to sell more, right? So how do you take an environment or systems infrastructure that's very, very, very challenging, right? And an ever-evolving sales management process, and how do you bring peace and order to that? And that's really what I'm excited to talk to you about today.
Amazing. Love to hear that background. I'm curious, before we dive in, how do you align your team, Scott? Do you have RevOps and marketing ops at Windstream?
Yeah, great question. Yeah, we do have, I have a revenue ops counterpart who manages all things revenue reporting, And then, yes, we do have a field marketing ops organization, which manages the MarTech stack, as well as, field deployed marketing programs.
Awesome. All right. So we know you're ready to talk about alignment too. You've done it before. All right, folks, I'm very excited to talk about this content today. We know enterprise accounts are just tricky in general. This is such a complex issue, and we're here to talk about aligning your enterprise customer data, but I want to back it all the way up and start talking about why it's even important in the first place. So Dave, I'd love for you to set the stage for us. Why is this even important? Why is it even a problem?
Sure. Yeah, no, good idea to start at the beginning. It's important for so many reasons. Scott touched on probably the number one reason, that sales operations teams and all organizations out there's primary focus is to sell more, right? And that in order to sell more, you have to have a good understanding of what you've sold already and what potential you have to sell more. And for enterprise accounts, you run into all these complex problems, but that what we've found across all of our customers is about 60% of most businesses' revenue comes from just 20% of their customers. It's the big ones, right? The ones that have signed these big contracts, or that you've sold across multiple departments, or hopefully across multiple entities or subsidiaries as well. And that in order to sell more, you have to have that clear understanding of what you've sold so that you can increase that footprint. But not just that, right? Territories is the other massive one, that every year most sales organizations have to redo their territories because they now have more sales reps or fewer, or they want to approach a new territory or a new segment. And that as they get bigger, they've created things like segmentation, size of business, geographies, verticals or industries. But what happens is inevitably you'll end up with these territory disputes, because sales reps will start working a deal for an account that somehow falls into their segment, but is actually part of a bigger business. And so it should actually be someone else's. And so all of a sudden this dispute happens, which causes just this infighting between your departments or your teams, and may even lead to double compensation, costing money, but it's certainly causing inefficiencies. And then I'd say the last one would be customer experience, right? That I read a stat, something like 9 out of 10 businesses are basically competing on customer experience alone, because everyone's got competition. Everyone has other companies that do the same thing as them. But it's almost impossible to give a great customer experience if you don't have all your data aligned, because reps, customer success folks, people just won't understand what each company has purchased and what they haven't, or what struggles they're facing through cases right now, if that data is not aligned. And that can cause really awkward customer experience. But so yeah, that's a few. Scott, you probably have more.
Yeah, Dave, I'm sitting here smiling and smirking as you're talking, because I feel all the pain of everything that you said. I joined Windstream in 2016 as the result of an acquisition with Earthlink. And Earthlink itself was actually a product of many, many acquisitions. Windstream had just acquired another company before us. They acquired another one right after us. And it was chaos, right? Chaos is probably a little strong. From a sales ops perspective, it felt like chaos. We had close to 5, maybe 6 versions of Salesforce when we started, right? And had something close to 5 million records just in one version of the Salesforce instance. And we had inconsistencies. Some versions of Salesforce, Dave, had one version of an account, right? They had gone through and resolved it down to the highest level. We had others that had thousands of records for one account. And then you had some that, were done at a physical billing address, some that were done at a subsidiary, some that were done at a bill to address. We had abbreviations, misspellings, right? And so it created a really challenging environment. And Dave, to your point, when we sat back and looked at it, there were challenges both internally and externally, right? The board, our investors were looking at, how do you define how many customers do you have? From a sales ops experience, we were merging different companies together, and we needed to ultimately resolve who should be the primary person on that account, right? So how do you not only stop any infighting between different sales channels or different teams, but how do you manage your leads and deploy things go forward? We tried to create a single pane of glass for our customers, right, through a portal, right, managing that customer experience you talked about. And you can't create a single pane of glass for them externally until you have it internally, right? So those were all, the same challenges that we were facing were the ones, Dave, that you just spoke to.
Oh, yeah. That's a really good point about the customer view, too, if you're trying to give them an exposure into that single pane of glass.
Well, and it's not only the single pane of glass, right? It's about a consistent customer experience, right? So if one part of the company gets one set of experience and another part gets a totally different experience, because they aren't brought together or because they're not grouped together, right? It can create challenges externally as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, no kidding. You mentioned sales reps causing a mess too, and misnaming it, whatnot. And it looked like, just going back to that poll, I think it said the number one, I think I'm looking back at the number one issue with dirty data, preventing people to, and then manually connecting accounts. So yeah, it sounds like other people are feeling that same pain, Scott. So were there any other issues that you guys ran into, or any other struggles that you had, Scott? I know that you fall into a different category where a lot of software companies would just have a digital exposure into an account, right? They really care about the buying authority, but you have additionally complex issues where you're selling physical goods too, or at least a physical line into offices.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, we faced a couple of challenges, right? Obviously, with a merger, you had different sales forces going after similar customer sets, right? So we had to resolve that. We had different channels, right? Whether it be with agents or inside sales, right? Trying to go after that. And ultimately, one of the first things that we had to do was to declare what was our source of record, right? Where were we going to manage that? And then ultimately, to your point, right? How do you lock it down, right? How do you create governance to stop the proliferation of data? Because until you can stop that proliferation of data, it's not going to get any better. And all the work that you do, all the hard work that you're going to do, just gets completely undone. And what we found is actually, we had data proliferation coming from two different areas, right? You had it from the reps, because at that point in time, we didn't have a mechanism to govern who added records and was there an approval cycle. But we also had software that was an integrator between all of our different systems. And so that software would actually create new records in Salesforce from some of our other systems. And so, it was really key to us to say, hey, this is where the definition of the customer is going to come from. Here's how we're going to define from an assignment perspective, from a hierarchy perspective, right? It's not an offline database. It's in the CRM that everybody's working. And then how do we lock it down so that it's a fixed database, and then we can start to work to improve what it looked like.
Oh, that's such a great example, because I think everyone's business is at a different stage in their life cycle, and not to mention a different type of business. Some are software companies that don't care about physical addresses. Others are manufacturers or telcos like yourself that care about the address. But that during that life cycle, early on, sales reps are running amok, and that one of the best things you can do, like Scott said, is to lock that down, have some governance and stewardship over who can create those accounts, so you can stem the bleeding at least. Yeah. Oh, that was great, Scott.
Love it. Creating that order in that chaos.
Good point.
Let's dig some more into the challenges. So you brought up some really great things here, but Scott, I want to keep going with you and talk about some more challenges you faced trying to align and connect that account data. Did you have anything else you wanted to add?
Yeah. So Taylor, when we first started, we actually had a database offline that managed a lot of that account governance. And again, I said one of the first things we said early on is, hey, we want Salesforce to be kind of that record and to start to propagate that. And so ultimately that meant we started with 0% of the data enriched or having any type of information on that. We knew it was important to know where we were physically providing services, but also where that decision needs to be made. And so, one of the first things that we tried to go after was, hey, like we need to go out and have a third party data provider and get all these records linked. And it is not realistic, although it goes against every fiber of my being, right? It's not realistic to expect that you can get to 100%, especially immediately, right? Because if you get to 100% immediately, I guarantee you've done something wrong, right? You've got false positives in there. And so we had to go through a really slow and methodical process, to ultimately add and codify that data, right? And then ultimately to go and then enrich that data for our sellers.
Scott, when you mentioned 100%, you're talking about mapping all of your records to that third-party data source?
Yeah. Yes.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So Dave, I mean, what we did is, we started a process. Again, we could not have done what we did without using a third-party data source, right? To tie it together and to have that hierarchy. Ultimately, there was stuff that you could do and you could say with 99% confidence, hey, yep, I absolutely know that this is this company and it's a great match. But then, reps, they get creative in their naming mechanisms and abbreviations, and sometimes they do room numbers and sometimes they do physical addresses. And so the data doesn't love that. And so you have to start to go through and ultimately it's a process that sales ops can only do so much. And then you need to go and talk to your sales reps to help get you over that final hurdle.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm glad that you brought up the third-party data source, because that's your map, right? That's what's going to tell you which companies are part of a bigger business. And so you absolutely need that, because anecdotally, you might know that Marvel is part of Walt Disney, but across 100,000 million records, there's no way that you can do that and have that understanding yourself off the top of your head. And you need the whole team to kind of be on board with that. I think one of the other struggles that you end up having, though, is that usually those third-party data providers provide a legal company hierarchy, so at least a 51% ownership or more. But that another struggle is that's not always the way you approach those customers. And Scott, I know you mentioned this to me before, that you treat holdings companies differently. Is that right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So again, I've been at companies where they define an account at an end user location, right? Dave Nelson Enterprises at 123 Main Street. For most of what we do, we are a Dun & Bradstreet shop, right? We use it as our primary data source. And so we define most everything at the global ultimate, right? Target corporation is Target corporation. However, you take like a Berkshire Hathaway, right? Or a Disney's a great example. And the folks at Benjamin Moore Paints do not make the same decisions as the folks at Geico Insurance, right? And so, we kind of have a hybrid model where we are predominantly at the global ultimate, the highest level, but by exception, we tie things, at a subsidiary level for major holding companies. The other thing, we do a lot of business with franchisees. And so it's important to know that, Taylor's Inc. or Nelson Inc. or Ellsworth Enterprises could all be doing business as a particular restaurant. And so, we've used Traction to not only manage it at the legal hierarchy level, but also to have the alternative hierarchy to say, okay, I know that all of these are Papa John franchisees, or all of these are, McDonald's franchisees. So then we can manage it both ways.
Nice. That's great.
Dave, I feel like you've got some more that you want to add that's going to relate to our poll as well. Would love to have you add some more color in with your challenges.
Oh my goodness. Well, you know what? I was actually looking at time, Taylor, and that we're 25 minutes in. We should probably start to help instruct on what can people do about it, right? Because we've now established that this is a really complex situation. There's systems issues, there's internal definition issues, there's data issues. But so there's no necessarily silver bullet to solve everything, but there is lots you can do. And you've already started to hear from Scott on some of those. But should we dive into kind of what we can do to start aligning?
Yeah, let's do it. Let me get to the right slide here. Where are we? Here we are. All right, Dave, jump right in. What can we start doing to get aligned, get that order and that chaos?
Yeah, I think what we usually recommend to customers is to start by defining what an account is to your business. And you heard Scott already talk about some of that. It's different for everyone. It might be a physical location, like Scott was saying. It might just be the buying authority for others. As you get bigger, you might have accounts per country, because that's how you've segmented your territories. And the point is that it doesn't matter what your definition is and how it relates to someone else's. It's just that everyone's on the same page, so that you can then start to codify, like Scott said, or start to build out rules to try and create this linkage and this better understanding, this alignment. And when you do that, you want to make sure you have all your different departments involved, right? Sales, marketing, customer success, that whole revenue team, but finance as well, because one of the differences that, Scott was mentioning how sales looked at those holdings companies. Finance may actually have a different understanding. They, from a corporate exposure, may look at these holdings companies as one entity. So you just want to make sure that you're taking all that into consideration, and then looking at those outliers, like the holdings company situation, like when you're selling into a company, and I think everyone's gone through it, where you're selling into the US portion of a business, but when they go to buy, they want to buy through their Ireland office or something, because they get better tax incentives there or whatever. And all of a sudden now you have to decide in your CRM, should this be an Ireland account or should it be a US account? So you need to go through that definition. And Scott, I know you guys have gone through a ton of that, or at least did back when you were solving the problem.
Yeah, so a couple of things kind of come to mind, right? The first is, yeah, absolutely, right? In order for us to solve our problem, again, we started with two really big things. The first is, we partnered with D&B to make sure that every record was codified, and we understood the family tree about it. And then the second thing is we had to seek out a tool for visibility. And that tool that we selected was Traction Hierarchies. And that allowed us to take this big, massive universe of data, right? And to ultimately understand it at a management level, right? On a very easy basis. Whenever a sales rep went into Salesforce, we could see where that account was in a company hierarchy. And we could see all the different selling relationships, whether it was internal to that one rep, or whether it had multiple reps across multiple business units. You could see and understand that universe in one place. And once you've done that, right, you can then go and figure out, okay, how do I take my data and consolidate it to a clean state? But then more importantly, how do you take that data, identify where the cross-sell and upsell opportunities are, because you now know where you're not doing business. And then you can identify where your ICP is, right? What's your ideal customer profile, and then add more records to your database, which again, kind of seems crazy, but you want to do it, right? You want to enrich your database with that. But you can't do that until you have that code and that visibility.
Oh, I'm so glad you brought that up, because I was saying that traditionally we would say to define your account first, but like you were just saying, we've now heard from so many customers that it helped them to have it visualized, even in its dirty state, all of these accounts linked together, so that they could try and make those decisions on what should an account be going forward. It allowed them to see all those duplicate scenarios where they might have 3 accounts that are part of Honeywell with different addresses, but then decide, do we actually need 3, or can we get rid of them? Yeah. So no, it was such a good point, Scott. I'm glad you brought that up. And you already mentioned that third-party data source. We would say, if anyone doesn't have one yet, you absolutely need to engage a third party for that map, right? For enriching your data, like Scott said, getting that 100%, but giving you that corporate linkage as a starting point. We mentioned that you may disagree with it in certain scenarios, but if you have 100,000 records or more, or 10,000 more or more for that matter, you have to be able to have this map so that you can automatically link those records together to give you that sense of Marvel and Pixar rolling up to Walt Disney. And there's lots of different data providers out there that give that sort of corporate linkage, and more all the time. Actually, we're seeing more and more pop up, but that we've found Dun & Bradstreet, like Scott was saying, that they use D&B, is certainly the industry leader in that corporate linkage. They've been curating the data for, I think, 180 years, which is baffling to me. But they've gone through all of the 10K filings for organizational structure, provided that not just for public companies, but private as well, so that then you get your foundation to link that. And which brings us to the second point. Now that you have that, you need to start linking that data together. And so often we see that companies try and do it manually. So they'll engage, an outsourced company out of Manila, or they'll hire interns, but it's just not possible. When you have 10,000 records, it takes about 2 to 5 minutes per record to go through and manually link it, because you're trying to find the account in your CRM, match that to what this data says on your third-party data source, find the account that map tells you it rolls up to, figure out if it exists in your CRM or not, and then make that linkage. So if you times that by 10,000, you're already at about 800 hours to get that done. If you have 100,000 records, it's another 10 times that. So you have to automate it. And in order to automate it, you either need to build some software that will do that, or to buy an application. And in either scenario, there's some pitfalls that you want to make sure that you avoid. One is duplicate records. We talked about it. In fact, that poll said that was the number one issue here, right? So duplicate records cause a problem because most people are going to try to use the parent account field in Salesforce, and Salesforce has attempted allowing you to link these accounts together. The issue is that when you have duplicates, you need to decide, well, which account should this roll up to? Which of those two? And then what do you do with the second one? And then on top of that, if this data source that you've secured says that you're dealing with both that global headquarters and, let's say, a grandchild of that account, it means you're missing some layers. And so then you have to decide, well, do you want to link it directly to the headquarters, or do you want to fill in that gap? And if you're doing that automatically, you can all of a sudden add thousands of records to your CRM that you haven't ever talked to, you don't have contacts for. And so it can really bloat it. It's not necessarily a duplicate, it's just an unnecessary record. And so we don't suggest to automatically fill that in. You want to be able to see those gaps. You want to be able to recognize where you are in the organization so that you can then decide on how to attack it afterwards. And so, sorry, Scott, I kind of ran on there. You guys went through just that. How did that go for you guys?
Yeah, no. So, just as you mentioned, we used the native Salesforce parent relationship as our first attempt to group. The first, there were a couple of challenges with that. The first challenge is because we were bringing in data, trying to collapse Salesforces, right, and bringing in multiple companies' data. You didn't necessarily know if they were inherent, right? And a lot of times with the duplicates, they're not inherently known as duplicates because they're not exact, right? And so that's the first thing, is that that parent, if you catch it, you can try to get it under, right? But it doesn't help you identify that. The second thing is, again, and you said it at the outset, one of the most important things you got to do is define what level you want your account to be. We had an account, and it's been 4 or 5 years, and we still talk about it, right? It was a medical center. And sometimes they spelled out the full name of the medical center. Sometimes they used an abbreviation, but they always put in an account for every room in the medical center. And so it had thousands and thousands of accounts. And they tried to use that parent relationship, and you kept on clicking to say, all right, this is the parent. And so it didn't work. And so, that's kind of where we got to the point of, hey, this just isn't going to work. And we've got to find a better way to solve it by using that. Now, the first attempt was that. The second attempt was, hey, it's really hard to do this in Salesforce. We're going to do it in an offline database. So the offline database actually grouped it together, but you didn't see that grouping inside of the CRM, which created all more problems inside of Salesforce because your sellers weren't seeing the data, right? So again, we took the stand, hey, our CRM is going to be the source of record for that. And that began to really make some magic.
Oh my goodness. It sounds like you encountered every issue. But yeah, that's a really good point around what's the source of truth and where do you put it? We see that all the time as well, particularly in bigger companies, but that you might have an MDM system, a master data system, and folks that aren't ever talking to the customers are trying to master this data. So one, it may not reflect what sales understands of the business, but two, it's in a system where they can't see it. And if we go back to that, the goals that we talked about at the beginning, selling more, territory planning, et cetera, if the sales reps can't see it, then there's no chance that they'll be able to sell more. Scott, you mentioned too that the 1,000 rooms for one business. So what we would suggest next, so if you've defined your account, if you've got that external data source, you've now linked it together, is then to go through that cleanup exercise. Some people want to do that first, but it will make your life so much easier if you get all that data linked together in its dirty state when you go to clean it up. Because when you do a data cleanup exercise, you usually go through waves. You'll go through the first pass through the data is an exact match. If the company has the same name and the same address, it's a duplicate. That's easy. Next step gets a little harder. The account may have a slightly different name and the same address, or the same name and a slightly different address. The third round gets even fuzzier, right? Then you have a different name and a different address, or maybe you don't have any address at all. That's where it becomes tough to decide whether you can get away with one account and merge them all, or you need to keep them. By having them linked together, you get that context. You can all of a sudden see whether or not you need to keep this. And so then it also helps with that definition. And that's why I think now companies are saying they want to see it in that dirty state in order to define, in order to see all those edge cases so that they can automate it. And once you've done that, you can set up more automation rules so that you're automatically cleaning up your data. You're automatically linking these records in the future so that you're not, like Scott said at the beginning, running into the same problem again after just doing one cleanup.
Yeah, even today, right, in the state of data that we have, which is vastly improved. I was on a call this morning, Dave, and we were doing an exercise where we're going to move some accounts. And the first thing that I said was, hey, pull and add to this the Traction hierarchy ID. So we've used Traction to create a unique identifier at the highest level of an account, right? So if you take Target Corporation, right? Target Corporation has a unique identifier. And if we've chosen to have multiple accounts in the database for that, all three of those tie back to that record, right? So even in a dirty state, having that and being able to see that unique identifier is really helpful. The other thing that we've done is, again, to that point of you're never going to be able to get your data 100% matched to that third-party data. We've been able to create unique identifiers in-house, right? So I can take accounts that I might not be able to tie to the DUNS. and I can group them together. Or I can group things that I know, for example, under Berkshire Hathaway, as opposed to grouping it at the highest level. I can choose to take out some subsidiaries and create its own unique identifier for that. And then that unique identifier becomes the standard key throughout the entire organization. So no matter where you are in your data journey, having that is really, really helpful and will help in everything you do.
That's a good point. And Scott, remind me, I think you guys then, like you said, you master the data in Salesforce. You then push that unique key elsewhere too, don't you?
Yeah, no, it goes to all of our systems, both internally facing, but it also then it is used in our finance databases. It's used in all of the marketing information we do, and drives ultimately the data that our customers see externally. And you know, as you guys know, it's not only does the customer want to see everything that they have, they also don't want to see things that aren't theirs. We don't want them to see things that aren't theirs, right? So it becomes that much more important to see it.
Oh, that's a really good point. And that's probably a whole nother topic we could spend another hour on. But yeah, Scott, you mentioned, so if we've already linked the data with that external data source, we've cleaned it up. You mentioned making it visible to your customers, or sorry, not to your customers, to your sellers, right?
Yep.
So that they can then sell more. One of the things that we've seen in the past is if people try to use that native parent account field, you can get it done. You can link your records together and decide on all your rules, but that it's kind of hidden. There's that little icon on the top of the account that if people know to click on it, they'll see some context just on the accounts, but it doesn't give a full view. And it's also making them take an action to go see it. The other downside is that it's only on the account record. And it was shocking to me, actually, spending so much time and data and whatnot, that I just assumed people were using it. But when you talk to the sellers, they rarely go to an account record. If they do, it's to get to an opportunity or to get to the contacts. And so what you want to do is make that hierarchy view, that alignment of your accounts, that whole definition, visible to where your sellers are. And that may be on the opportunity. It may be on the contacts. It might even be on the leads. And then, of course, on the accounts. But to put it where they're going to be so that they have that context when they need it. When a lead calls in and they need to respond, they can see it. When they're working on an opportunity, they can see others. So to give them that visibility, and then try to also give them more context than just the account structure. Right? The account structure is fascinating to see that Marvel is reporting to Disney. But what I really want to know is, have we sold to Marvel or to Disney or to Pixar? What have we sold? What haven't we? So to give them that additional context in that view.
Yeah, Dave, you know, for us, that was a big part of our adoption strategy, right? You know, is we went down this path. Again, there was only so much that I could do in-house to ultimately clean the data, and as smart as the people are that work for me, and they are very smart, right? Like we only have so many hours in the day. And so what we ultimately did is we ended up doing a roadshow market by market, right? Once we got the data to a point where it was, let's call it 80-ish% codified with Dunn's data, we then went market by market. And so the first thing we did is we'd say, okay, let's dig into the market and those things that aren't Dunn's coded and see if we see any patterns, right? And you pick up a lot when you look at it by market versus, you know, at a holistic level. And then we went there, right? We went with our directors and with the vice presidents with two goals in mind, right? The first was to create a rules-based coverage model, because once you have the data, right, there's a lot of cool things you can do from a sales ops perspective, right? So we wanted to define our territories and create a set of rules so that we could automate our lives, and we could automate new leads, and we could automate bringing in accounts. And then the second thing was to ultimately resolve all those lingering data issues and the difficult to manage duplicates, to figure out who is truly the right person to do it. And traction ultimately was the way we did this, right? So we identified the top duplicates inside of a territory. We stack ranked them by revenue, and we sat there with them. And you know, it was really interesting because you look at it and you go, oh, well, if Johnny has, you know, $10,000 and Susie has 500, that should be an easy decision. Well, it's not. And it's because of the complexity of certain accounts. It's because of subsidiaries. And so, we ultimately used the white space button in Traction to go in to understand, as you said, what does that hierarchy look like? Where do we have business? Where are they using certain products of ours versus where aren't they? And then ultimately, what part of the hierarchy is missing? And so we were able to solve our duplicates that way. But as we went through that, one VP came to me and said one of the most valuable things they did was to actually take the time to know where our Traction window was in Salesforce, and it was predominant on the front page. But to be able to go in and research an account, and it's now the very first thing I coach all of my reps, all of my engineers, everybody to look at, because you can, in a click of a button, again, understand that 360 view, not only of internal data, but external data. And that's where you understand, hey, I didn't realize that they own this, or I didn't realize that they had a recent merger, or, hey, I've already gotten in with this account. Let me go try to upsell them and get into corporate. And so that's ultimately how we were able to adopt and to kind of push us over the edge of moving from 80%, closer to 90% of data integrity.
Well, Scott, I'm so glad you brought that up, making it visible, but also training people. Because I think in any project, whether it's aligning your accounts or bringing in a new system or anything, one of the most important things is to make sure that your teams are adopting it. Right? You can lead a horse to water, but you can't make them drink. If they don't know it's there, if they're not using it, then all of that time and effort was useless, right? And so I think, how did you tackle that? I think you did more than anyone I've ever heard of to make that happen.
Yeah, and that ultimately, Dave, was that roadshow, right? Like that was going through, we did the major launches, right? We blogged about it and told success stories. That was helpful, but it was one-on-one, looking at someone in the eye. And my sales directors are just like everybody else's sales directors. They got a million things going on. And to be able to show them the power that it had, for them to find opportunities, right? It not only did it help solve, oh, hey, I didn't realize the channel was in here, or I didn't realize inside sales had a part of that account. That was helpful, right? To resolve things. But to be able to better understand and get intelligence on the account and where we're doing business, that strategic part really was what set it apart and turned it from a data problem to a sales enablement issue, a sales enabler, if that makes sense.
Hey folks, wait, I'm so sorry we're having such a great convo, but I do want to jump in since we only have 12 minutes together and check out the Q&A really quickly, and then we can pop into our key takeaways. How does that sound?
Sounds great.
Okay, cool. So we got this great question from Robert, and they asked, what has been your experience or how have you partnered with the sales leaders to develop those territories that you were talking about earlier, and what insights did those sales team get from it? Does anyone want to take this first?
Yeah, sure. Right. So again, I'll talk to our experience, right? Just as was asked, right? Like in going through and using it as a tool, not only for operations, right? Because you can use hierarchies internally, right? But it's very helpful and it will solve a lot of issues. But where we were able to really, take the next step, right, was in that training, and making that part of the culture of how they look at an account. Because to Dave's point, right, the first thing they do is they don't look at an account, right? They go into an opportunity or they go into a case. So, kind of that training and education, I found was really, really helpful. Dave, what do you see?
Yeah, I mean, I think if the goals are to sell more, it's using that in your one-on-ones, particularly with your enterprise or your strategic reps, with their sales leader in their one-on-ones to say, hey, what is your attack plan for this account? What have we sold? What haven't we? Where is that potential penetration? Scott mentioned the white space capability. That, for those of you who don't know, that's basically a window outside of your CRM to see, okay, well, what are these other businesses that are affiliated with Disney or Pixar or whatnot, so that you can all of a sudden put in a plan together for expanding that business. So that's probably the number one. But there's all sorts of others, right? It's the avoiding territory conflicts and creating those even territories, scoring those accounts and considering the hierarchy. And then it's much harder to quantify, but the customer experience is last. It's when you're receiving a phone call or a chat, recognizing who they are, what they've purchased, what cases they've entered recently, to give that truly white glove treatment to your customers that would just be impossible otherwise.
Dave, you talk about quantifying it externally. Quantifying it internally is interesting too, right? Like, and I sat back and tried to think through this. I've got a number of vendors where I pay per record that they manage, right? So being able to clean up my duplicates became a money saver. But in terms of noise, duplicates was the number one complaint that all of our sellers had, right? Duplicates, data quality, the time it takes to pull inventory, and then internal conflict. And that is not a noise that we're hearing now in the surveys that we're doing of our sales reps, right? So we've been able to take one of the top complaints and basically eliminate it from the chatter.
That's awesome. I know that there's other types of businesses that have major regulations around them, that they're not allowed to sell into certain organizations, particularly when those companies are in countries that have sanctions against them. So I know ARM's a major chip manufacturer, and they're not allowed to sell into certain countries. That's probably more relevant today than ever with the Russia-Ukraine conflict going on and all the sanctions being put in place. But so depending on your business, just that visibility and exposure can be a massive benefit to avoiding any regulations as well.
Awesome. Well, we only have 8 minutes left. Robert, I hope you got your question thoroughly answered there. And I want to move on to our key takeaways, our top takeaways here. Scott, Dave, any tips that you can share, any more advice that you'd like to give if you had maybe 1 to 3 things you'd want folks to walk away from this call, what would they be? Dave, let's start with you.
Oh, nice. I was going to pass it to Scott.
Oh, Scott, you can start first. Let's go, Scott.
So, when we started this project, we actually had 2 projects. The first we called the Path to 100. How do you get the data to where everybody feels it's as close to 100% as possible? And I think a lot of folks on this call spend their time doing that. The second project, the less sexy project, but the more important project, was what we called the Path to Forever. How do you keep that data from getting out of control, right? So how do you create monitoring? How do you create processes so that ultimately you can be in a forever stage, and it's not something that you're worried about on a day-to-day basis, or it's not something that's clean for a year and then in 2 or 3 years it's a mess again. And so being able to look at that holistically would be my greatest advice, and knowing again that it's not something you can really tackle on your own, right? You've got to have those keys to do it, right? You got to have intelligence of your sales ops folks and your field sellers. You have to have a tool to codify the data, and then you've got to have visibility to ultimately show it.
Love it. Love those. Dave, your turn now.
I would say go through a crawl, walk, run, right? For companies that have waited too long, it becomes this enormous bottleneck in their system, and they have to go through this huge project. But you can start earlier, right? Your crawl would be secure that external data source so that you get that map, link those records together in their dirty state, so that then you can define your accounts and start to clean it up. But even just those first 2 steps will get you rolling and be able to have a map in its dirty state on what you can sell, but it's also going to then almost force you to then clean up some of that data and put more automation in place to avoid causing any more disruption later. And so that's probably the biggest one. I think, Scott, what did you call it? I like that. It was forever.
Path to forever. Yes.
Path to forever. I love that.
Patent pending. Like
nice.
All right, folks. We hope that this is a foundation for your path to forever as well. I just want to give a huge thank you to everyone who attended today, to Scott today. This was fantastic. There was so much information. I loved it. And of course, Attraction Complete. Big shout out, big thank you for even sponsoring this event. Like I said, this is 1 in a 4-part series. So if you would like to sign up for the next one, if you hover over to the top and there's a dark blue button that says sign me up for the next event, we'll make sure that we get you registered for that next one as well. And we'll send you the landing page and everything so you can get a sneak peek at the content. But thank you, everyone. Have a great rest of your week and see you at another MSP event. And we better see you at the summit. Bye, folks.
Thanks, Taylor.